Welcome. Thanks for joining us today. It's flattering to see so many people. I mean, I didn't invent email, but it's nice to see so many people interested in email archiving. Welcome to our tutorial. My name is Tricia Patterson. I'm hunching over like this because I foolishly opted for them to just, let's do it this way, and I realized that it's kind of hard to hear me from here. Is it hard to hear me from here? It's okay? Okay. Well, let me know if it ends up being hard. My name is Tricia Patterson. I'm a senior digital preservation specialist in digital preservation services at Harvard Library, and I'm the co-project manager on the project that we're discussing today. And this.
Hi everyone, I'm Sally DeBauche. I'm a digital archivist at Stanford, and I've also worked on the ePADD project for several years now.
And there's another name up here, Paul Carlyle. He's not here today, unfortunately. Our Manchester colleagues that are partners on our project were not able to make it up, even though they were the closest ones. They were the nearest in proximity, but it just didn't work out scheduling-wise. But you will see, or hear rather, his sultry tones over an ePADD demonstration that he graciously pre-recorded for us so that we could avoid any technological difficulties. So thank you for joining us today, and we will just hop right into it. All right. Yeah. I'm going to be doing the first part, and then I'm going to hand it over to Sally to do the second part. So we are excited to actually walk everyone through a demonstration of the new features in ePADD. But first, we're going to take a step back, and Cal, I know I think you're chairing this session, but yeah, no. No, I was only going to apologize because I know that you've seen a lot of this already, but that's good. You can just really take over your chairing duties. We're going to talk a little bit about why email archiving is important, why we're even here today, doing a project like this. We are going to introduce a little bit of the ePADD Plus project if you haven't heard about it already. It's a collaboration between Harvard Library and Stanford University and the University of Manchester. Talk a little bit about why and how the project was initiated, the objectives of the work, what the enhanced features are that we've been rolling out. We're not quite done rolling them out. We've got about 6 months left in the grant, but we do have our first alpha version available, which is what we'll be demonstrating today. And then we'll talk about how each partner institution is actually implementing ePADD at their organizations to just help you get a bit of a feel for, it's nice to see the actual demonstrations and everything, but how to actually take it back to your organization and put it to use is another thing. And we all have kind of different institutional models, so hopefully that'll give you a broad base of comparison. And then we'll wrap up. We're going to do some communities discussion. Like the whole last half hour, we're really interested in just hearing from y'all and getting good ideas about how to sustain this open source project that's been pretty successful. It's in its fourth round of development. This is the fourth phase of development, but it's open source, it's community driven, and we need all the help we can get going forward. So we hope that everyone here and more people afterwards will continue to partner on this project. During the demonstration, it's a little difficult, with these kind of tutorials. It's software that you need to download, and then sometimes there's technical troubleshooting. If you want to participate, you need to go to the ePADD GitHub and download version 9.0 alpha, and then have an inbox file kind of up and ready to go. But the pre-recorded demonstration that we have, we're going to be putting up on the YouTube afterwards, and we'll talk about where you can find that. If you wanted to, kind of see how we go through it here today, Sally and I are going to be around the rest of the conference, so if you want to spend your time tonight hanging out in your hotel room practicing on ePADD, please feel free to do so, or in between breaks, and then you can just set us up for any kind of questions and troubleshooting afterwards as well. So let's just hop right into it. I'm going to read this out just for accessibility purposes, but this is a quote from the Future of Email Archives, which is a clear report from the task force on, what was it? The task force on email archiving something. A couple of people, I see Kate back there, she was on it, I think Cal was on it, so we definitely got people that participated in this task force. It was from 2018, and if you are involved in email archiving and have not read this yet, I strongly recommend reading this whole thing. It's a really comprehensive, it manages to be both broad and really detailed at the same time way of getting you started on email archiving and giving you a really good landscape view of all the different techniques and strategies that existed as of 2018. You know, we've gotten a little further in the last 4 years. Maybe it's time for an update. But everything that existed and all the opportunities there are for collaboration to move the field forward as well. So email represents an increasingly important part of the historical record. Preserving and ensuring access to this record are therefore central to the functions and values of archives and archivists. Until we can meet the challenges of email archiving, responsible custody is undermined, accountability is abandoned, and ultimately, the historical record is imperiled. In short, the problem won't take care of itself, and the time to act is now. And like I said, that was 4 years ago. So we've been acting. There's been action in the field for sure. I also see, I'm going to mention her a little bit later, but Ruby Martinez is part of that action as well. The University of Illinois has a great grant program out right now that's sponsoring lots of different work in the email archiving area. So there's been great action going on. But that's just to say, even though email has been proliferating as a record for decades now, a lot of programs are still in their nascency for being able to support proper stewardship of this record. I'd count us at Harvard among it. We've had our own system that I'll talk about in a little bit, but only a few of our collecting units have actually gotten up and running on email archiving. So, and we're a fairly well-resourced institution. I'd love to take a quick poll actually and get a little feedback on how everybody else is doing this. On your computers or your phones, if you go to menti.com, that's menti.com, and put this code in, 45314943 is the code. Yeah, and the first question here is, what statement best describes the state of the email archiving activities at your organization? And it's all anonymous. You don't have to be embarrassed if you're early here. I'm going to take a drink of water while we do that. And then don't exit out of this when you're done, because I have one more question coming up after this. All right, I think the unsurprising pattern we're seeing is that most folks haven't even gotten started, or it might not be applicable to your organization as well. But if the folks that have getting started, nobody feels that they're expertly stewarding email and have been for years yet. And in comparison, can anyone, I'm interested, does anybody, not Cal because he has a tool named after this, but who invented email? Can anyone raise their hand and give us a guess? All right, Cal, who invented email? Ray Tomlinson. Thank you, Ray Tomlinson and Cal's tool. I think you're presenting on Ray Tom during iPres, right? And when was that first email from Ray Tomlinson sent? When was the first email sent? Anybody have a guess or knowledge on that? It's 1971, so that's a long time. And that those first emails were not preserved. Let's see if get our next question up here. What is your experience using ePADD? Since this is a tutorial on ePADD, we'd just like to get a quick view of anyone currently using this that's in here, or is it just out of interest or trying to get started? All right. Well, I guess our hope coming out of this is that you could at least get to the tested but not implemented or beginning to use it stages. That'd be a great outcome. All right, and that's all the questions I have, so you can exit out of Menti now. Let me get back to the slides. I'm just going to go back through this real quick. Okay, so just talking a little bit about laying the groundwork here for the conversation we're having about email preservation. When we're talking about preservation imperatives, some of the things that come to mind, archivally are we're trying to preserve the integrity of email, the authenticity of email as a record, its ongoing accessibility, and ultimately its usability as, in an information experience way, and whether that's getting into things like formatting or actually being able to experience old email clients, just worrying about the headers and everything like that. There's kind of a big profile and a big differential in what we can think about when we're determining what's important to preserve about the email records themselves. But those mapping over to email records specifically, for integrity, we might want to include the complete header information. So that's not just like the to and from fields, but you might want the IP address, you might want the client bouncing that happens. There's actually a really rich set of header metadata that we want to include if you're needing to use this later as an evidentiary record, for instance, or to reveal other information. There can be multi-part bodies, attachments, normalized derivatives or the original form of attachments. There might be some protection and security due to the sensitive nature of email correspondence that you need to think about. In terms of authenticity, we might be thinking about preserving original order or the original directory information. If you have an email collection coming in from somebody and you are concerned about what kind of folders they may have saved stuff in, if they saved stuff in at all, if they opened those emails or read the emails, if there are ways of figuring that out. Accessibility, you have full text bodies and the attachments themselves, but, is formatting important? What are you looking to, accessibly preserve? And then usability, search, retrieval, and rendering. And again, there's a lot of really cool projects going on in the email archiving field around determining if you wanted to just preserve in PDF form and try to really capture the formatting of an email itself, or if you're really looking at, you could even look ahead if you preserve the original OLMs or PSTs or whatever you're getting out of it, emulating an email client experience. So thinking ahead at what kind of user experience that you want to be able to support later on. Now, starting around, like 2009 and 2010 here, you can see some organizations started to, there weren't any good email archiving tools out in the world. So a couple of places started to work on things separately. Harvard at the time, we were not thinking about community good necessarily. We just developed something that would help us. So we developed an email archiving system called EASE in 2009, and we did it to support just email archiving processing, just processing the messages and then preserving them in our preservation repository. But it was a homegrown tool. It included a lot of our own just private code base. We didn't release it out into the open or anything, but Stanford was clever enough to start building ePADD, and they released that around 2010, and that supports archival appraisal, processing, discovery, and delivery. And then I just wanted to note that down at the bottom here, the University of Manchester actually used this for their Palladium project, which we'll talk about in a little bit. This is a screenshot of what the import screen looked like for our EASE system. It was really great and everything, but around the time that Clear Task Force report came out, and this actually is an image from that Clear Task Force report, I didn't properly attribute that. One of the big recommendations from that was that systems start thinking about, instead of having a bunch of different systems proliferating that you have to use a bunch of different things to go through the whole workflow of appraisal to acquisition to processing to preservation and then to discovery and access, trying to integrate those tools in a more interoperable way, even looking towards consolidating those tools. So back around 2020, 2019, Harvard started talking to Stanford about our tools. And at the time, Harvard was just thinking, oh, our email archiving system, ease, let's just open source it and make it more interoperable with these other tools, because we really like a lot of the things that it does. It tracks, preservation metadata, it tracks the normalization event while we're pulling email in, and then it packages it up nicely for deposit into our repository, whereas ePADD was doing a lot of really great things in appraisal and processing and discovery and access. So we're like, okay, how can we start making these work well together? And you can see here, this is another quote from the Future of Email Archives report, mentioning some of the other really great tools in the area too. Tools such as Darkmail, ePADD, Ease, and Tomes deserve support that allows for their closer integration and alignment over time. We took that to heart. So we started talking about how we can better align them, and then we decided, why not just kind of combine them? Why not take everything? I mean, ePADD was already a really great community-loved tool, and there was already good enhancements going on. So we said, why don't we take what we like from Ease and just try to embed that into ePADD? And really, that primarily was around the preservation support, so tracking extended metadata, and actually Sally's going to go through all the different kind of enhancements in the different areas that we embedded into this, but packaging everything up, capturing premise events throughout everything, and making sure it was preserved in all the ways that we kind of discussed earlier about to make it a good record, a sustainable record over time. So then came the University of Illinois' EABCC re-grant opportunity, and it's email archiving, building capacity and community. Is that right, Ruby? Thank you. And so they're listed down here as a partner because they funded us very gratefully. But Harvard Library, the University of Manchester at the time had been working on their Palladium project, which was enhancing ePADD in their own ways to support the Kukarnet publisher email archives that they had gotten, and they were really interested in the preservation aspect of this too. So Stanford introduced us, and we said, let's all partner together. And look, this great grant funding opportunity has arose at just the right time. And we said, let's put the Ease long-term preservation functionality into ePADD, work on this all together, and then have a really good, we all have kind of different institutional use cases, so it'll give us a broader kind of perspective as we're moving forward on building the system out. So I just want to thank everybody that's a part of this project before we get into the demo. Stephen Abrams, head of digital preservation at Harvard Library, is our PI on the grant. And then Dee Dee and Jesse, Janet, Julie, and Andrew are part of our library technology services crew. The main development is actually taking place within the University of Manchester team, and that's Jochen and Ian and Tom, who really wanted to be here today, Jan and Jessica and Paul Azal, Paul Carlyle, who you'll hear in a bit, is our co-project manager on the project. And then Stanford Libraries and Amuse Labs, they've been running the ePADD project for years. Amuse Labs were the original developers on the project, so we needed them in as the code consultants this was our first opportunity. Even though it's been an open source project, Amuse Labs had been basically the sole developers on the project. So it was our first time to start expanding the contributors to the code base and making sure it was more open and able for other people to start contributing to it. So they stayed on to make sure that code was consistent, and Stanford was there making sure that we just kept the program, I think y'all were ready to hand it off in a little bit, didn't want to always be the people spearheading it forever. And this was the opportunity to make sure there was consistency in kind of project administration, but bringing in other partners to really start getting this going. And then Ruby and Chris is our wonderful grant team behind this. So I'm going to hand it over to Sally to actually talk about what enhancements we included, and then we'll get into the demonstration.
Okay, so now that we have some background on the ePADD Plus project, I'm going to go into a little bit more detail on the work that we've done so far in the form of the features that we have added to the software. And these features correspond to three major stages of work within ePADD, which are the importing email collections, adding metadata, and then exporting. Okay, so starting with importing, Tricia was discussing the different features that could be present in the header metadata, and a big priority was to make sure that ePADD was retaining as much of that header metadata as possible so that it could be saved for all of the information that you can glean from that. And then it would also give users the opportunity to add any kind of sidecar files that they would like to include with that email. This could be any type of notes or documentation that fits within their workflow or institutional policies. In terms of metadata, the new version of ePADD allows for a much richer set of metadata to be added to email collections. Some of this is actually automatically generated, and those are, for example, premise events. And then there's a pretty wide array of metadata that can be manually entered by the user. And you'll see an example of all of those fields in our demo. And then we've also aggregated where the metadata is stored within the structure of the ePADD data, just to make it a little bit easier to manage. And then finally, in terms of export, we wanted to make sure that the package was really as preservation ready as possible. So it's including the broadest sort of set of data about the collection as possible. And that would include the original email files in their native file format, as we call them, the canonical version, the converted mbox if applicable, and then derivative, appraised, or processed versions of the collection. Those could include changes that the processor has made in the form of adding labels or annotations, redactions to messages present within the archive, and then those additional sidecar files, which really can be anything that the institution deems necessary to preserve, as well as all of that metadata. Okay, so we all know that live demonstrations are dangerous and a fool's errand. So we have a pre-recorded demonstration. Okay. From our wonderful colleague Paul Carlyle at the University of Manchester. And this will just walk you through the new features added to ePADD as the latest version.
To download the latest release of ePADD 9.0 Alpha, you will need to download the latest ePADD distribution file from GitHub, and we can provide a link to the relevant web page. The file is found under the heading Assets. For those using Windows, only the exe file is needed. Those using Macs will need the DMG file. The appraisal module is the default module in ePADD. It's one of 4 modules: appraisal, processing, discovery, and delivery. The module allows users to review email archives on a local server prior to their transfer to an archival repository. When first launched, you'll find yourself on the import screen. This interface is where you enter information about the owner of the email account, so for example name and an associated email address, and specify the location and account information of the mbox files or IMAP email accounts. You can select multiple accounts as well as multiple mbox files by selecting the Add Another Account or the Add Another Folder buttons. We should just note that at present ePADD will work successfully with IMAP imports from Gmail accounts only. In this clip we've entered some information about the account owner. We've specified a location for the mbox files. We can now import those into ePADD. Once the import is complete, we'll be taken through to the appraisal module's dashboard. One of the new features developed for the ePADD Plus project is the ability to capture a richer set of metadata, both automatically and manually. Here we have examples of metadata that can be added manually. Clicking the information button on the main browse page opens a window with information about the collection. Clicking the metadata button brings you to the page for adding or editing metadata. On the tabs here we can switch between collection, EAD and premise. The collection metadata in this particular tab was already a feature in earlier versions of ePADD. You can add some basic information about the collection, title, short description, scope and content. We can do the same for EAD, which is new to this version of ePADD. And also for premise. So far the examples we've seen have been applied to the collection as a whole, that is a collection made up of several mbox files, but you can also add or edit premise metadata for an individual file. Premise also has an XML schema that has been developed for preservation metadata. Here you can see an example of the ePADD premise XML file, which contains the manually added premise metadata, as well as some metadata automatically added by ePADD, such as date and time of ingest, number of attachments in the collection, and this allows the metadata to be stored in a single place rather than being scattered. When mbox files are imported into the appraisal module, ePADD creates what we refer to as a canonical acquisitioned file. Canonical is the single file format designated by ePADD as a common standard-based format for transfer and long-term preservation purposes. The designated ePADD canonical format is mbox. Acquisitioned, in this context, refers to the unmodified form of email as originally received by ePADD and not yet subject to any appraisal or processing. Copies of ingested mbox files are stored here in the directory. This clip demonstrates how we approve and export emails into the preservation ready bag. In this example, it's only a single email, but it can be applied to batches of emails. It will include any labels or annotations attached to the emails. In this example, we've applied a label to the email, cleared for release, and we've also added an annotation as well. Then we select the export option. The exported emails are contained in a folder within the directory. As you can see in the clip, the file includes the label and annotation that were added in the appraisal module. The processing module provides archivists with the means to arrange and describe email archives on a local server. To move to the processing module, the appraised email archive has to be exported. On the main screen, we select Export. We then select Browse under Export to Next ePADD module. Select the location where ePADD is to export the email archive. And if we look at the file directory, we can see that the emails have been exported to the designated folder, along with all of the related information. To open up the processing module, we need to restart ePADD and click on the relevant collection. If we want, we can check and amend the collection or premise metadata. To enter the processing module itself, we simply click Enter. From the processing module, we can export the emails to ePADD's discovery and delivery module. The Discovery module provides the tools for archives and libraries to remotely share a redacted view of email archives with users through a public web server. The Delivery module enables them to provide moderated full-text access to unrestricted email archives within a reading room environment on a local server. Again, we follow the process we used for transferring emails from the Appraisal module to the Processing module. Starting in the Discovery and Delivery modules is very similar to how we started the Processing module. We click on the relevant collection of module. In this example, we've selected the Discovery module. Dashboard has fewer options as it's designed for access only. As I mentioned earlier, the Discovery module is designed to run under a web server and allow remote users to search redacted header info and extracted entities while limiting full text access to the materials.
So again, we're going to post this afterwards on our YouTube, so you can like hang out with this tutorial later and walk through it if you want. Nope. Already did it. Don't need to do it here. All right. So we are going to go through each of our institutional use cases, and I'm going to present Manchester's because they're not here today. And again, that's just so you can understand. It looked like a lot of folks hadn't gotten up on ePADD yet, or were just starting it out, in email archiving at your organization. So if you're looking to move forward in that, this will hopefully give you a good kind of practical example of what a few different institutions, how we've got, because we all do it a little differently. And for instance, Manchester's is based on a specific email collection that they've gotten, the Carcanet Press email archives. Ours are based on like a use case coming through from our university archives, and then Stanford's has been using ePADD for a long time, so they've got kind of a workflow that represents a wide range of different ways that they're acquisitioning archives. And then we all each have a different repository model as well. So this is a look at, and I apologize, in terms of accessibility and seeing the slides, I feel like the diagrams are maybe the hardest part to see. We're talking through all these. But at the University of Manchester, this is for their Palladium project, centered on the acquisition and processing and preservation of the Carcanet Press email archives. So they start by, let's see, does this reflect on there? Yeah. They start by, they're collecting just PSTs right now, so they're not worrying about a wide variety of formats at the time being. They're just collecting PST files from Carcanet, and they run some initial checksums just to make sure that they have something to refer to later for authenticity purposes. And then they begin an event log. So they produce some early reports on the content. And then those original PSTs, for now, pre-ePADD Plus, they've separately been depositing the PSTs into Preservica before converting them using something called Whole Clear PST Converter into an inbox and bringing that into the ePADD appraisal module. Post ePADD Plus project, they're actually going to be able to bring this all into ePADD and including the original PSTs, and push everything into their Preservica repository. So I'll clarify that more in a second. But right now they're depositing the original PSTs into Preservica. Then they're doing some initial appraisal in Outlook, and then converting the PST to inbox. That inbox file they're bringing into ePADD for appraisal and processing, and redaction and tagging and things like that. And then they're exporting an inbox and all related metadata and putting that into Preservica. They're also just starting to look at doing some discovery and delivery as well. I think they're doing more widespread discovery. If you haven't looked at the ePADD discovery and delivery modules yet, they're actually really clever. They were developed in a really good way. I think a lot of people, when they're first getting into it, are like, wait, we're not ready to put our email archives out there. That's a lot of really sensitive data. But the email discovery module, and there's actually now a collaborative discovery site that, I mean, y'all have collections up there at Stanford, but New Zealand, where? UC Santa Cruz has one. New Zealand had one up, or maybe they're going to put it up again later. Yeah, but if you do that, you may have seen in Paul's demo at the end. It's very redacted. You're not seeing anything that you wouldn't want anybody else to see, but it gives you a chance for researchers or users to then say, I think this is what I'm looking for. I'm looking for the emails from this user, and you can use the ePADD discovery module or delivery module just in your reading room, offline, still secure, to actually give that section of emails to the researcher. So if you have any use cases now, you'll see at Harvard when we get into our workflow, most of our email is embargoed for 50 to 80 years, so we kind of have a get out of jail free pass. We don't have to worry about it right now. But if you have use cases for that, it's really cool. Yeah, but then for post ePADD Plus, basically all of this stuff that they have to do in Outlook and separate deposit of PSTs, they're now going to be able to just do all through ePADD, which is great. It kind of takes off that part of their workflow. This is actually more anticipatory because we're just starting to implement ePADD. We're nearly done decommissioning ease, our homegrown email archiving system. So this is a kind of a conflation of what we have been doing with ease and what we're now going to be doing with ePADD. So this is just based on one use case. We actually get a huge range of formats from the different, our art museum and our archives are our main email archiving units right now. So this is based on an archives use case, but they get a big range of formats and for a lot of different ways. They might get hard drives, they might get like whole computers left to them, they might have people leaving that export their Outlook email accounts. And in this, it's a scenario where a Harvard employee leaves and the archives collects their PST from their Outlook account. So they bring it onto an encrypted hard drive, and once all of the enhancements are done to ePADD, we're going to be able to bring in, we're right now looking at integrating a commercial format conversion tool. So ease, our homegrown Harvard email archiving system, I keep saying it because I don't know if you otherwise are going to recognize ease offhand. Ease had emailchemy. Can anyone raise their hand if they've used emailchemy before? A couple of folks, just a couple of hands. It's a commercial format conversion tool for email records. Aid4Mail is another really popular one as well. But emailchemy we use at Harvard because it's cross-platform functional, and we have a lot of Mac users as well as Linux users and stuff. So we had emailchemy embedded into ease, so you could bring in any kind of format. The conversion happens within ease, and then that normalization event is audited, and you can export a variety of formats as well. Right now, we actually just had a conversation with the folks at emailchemy the other day. So as part of our project, we did a little survey of folks in the email archiving community to say, I think we got like 20 responses or something, which isn't bad. But just to say, like, what email format conversion tools are people using, and what did they like and not like about them? And emailchemy rose to the top pretty quickly as the one that people were using if they were doing anything. It will remain an optional integration. It's first and foremost important for us that ePADD stays an open source tool freely available. But there are no really great open source format conversion tools for email right now. And whether or not that's something, I mean, we'd love to see somebody do a project where they create that, if anyone's interested. But for the time being, that wasn't in scope or budget for our project. So we're working on just creating the integration if you wanted to optionally put in your product key for emailchemy and have a code base where you could have it integrated so you can bring in any kind of format you wanted, because the reality is most people are having to do format conversions at their institution pre-ePADD so that they can get it into the inbox format. So in this scenario, we have emailchemy integrated. We're pulling the PST straight into ePADD. So email can be integrated for format conversions. Doing the appraisal. We actually stop at appraisal for a lot of the email collections at Harvard because there's that 50 to 80 year embargo period. And those of you that have worked with email collections before know that these are really large corpuses of information, corpora. These are large collections, so a lot of time you might be doing incremental processing. You might be going straight to maybe just like light discovery, and then as people are coming through and requesting bits of it, doing some redaction on the go. There's a lot of different ways that you might approach appraisal, or you can just do some appraisal initially, or even have the content creator do the appraisal themselves in the appraisal module. And then from there, you might just go ahead and export that into your repository if you have one set up. So in this scenario, if it's embargoed, we have an export bag that includes the original PST. We use EML for preservation, and if you would have something like email can be integrated, you can export to EML, and then an XML of the metadata. If it's not under an embargo period, push it into the processing module, and this is the export that would come out of there. And then, like I said, we don't have a lot of discovery and delivery use cases yet, but we're excited to try it out. I think our Baker Business Library says that they have some stuff that they want to do discovery and delivery on. So I'm going to hand it over to Sally to talk through the Stanford workflow.
Okay, so we've been collecting and processing email at Stanford for about the last decade or so, and we have really empowered our curators to collect email as part of their collecting process, and they do. We get email pretty regularly with collections, and it can come to us in a variety of ways. So it can come to us on hard drives, floppy disks, other removable media that we receive with collections. That can be in any number of file formats from any time period. So we've received some pretty old Eudora files up to more modern PST files, really runs the gamut. We sometimes work with donors directly to help them transfer their email to us, even working with them to get temporary access to their email accounts so that we can export their email for them, and then of course they change their credentials. And then we have had a few very motivated donors who have actually imported their own email into ePADD and done some initial appraisal themselves before then transferring that appraised version of their collection onto us. So like Tricia was discussing the conversion process, we do convert email into the mbox format in order to import it into ePADD, and we do typically use email for that, and we've had varying degrees of success depending on the original email. Email, if you've ever worked with it, is very dependent on the original data that you start with. So if you are starting with email files that are in some way corrupted or lacking elements, you are probably going to have issues when you try to convert them. Moving on to appraisal, we do all of our appraisal and processing within ePADD. So this appraisal is usually with an eye to restricting legally protected information and also information that Stanford IT deems as high risk. That's their data classification for data that needs to be handled specially. So that would include like active social security numbers, medical information, student information, that type of thing. So once we were satisfied with that process, then we'll move on to the processing of the collection itself. That can include actions like making changes to the address book within ePADD to clean up or correct names of correspondents. It can also include adding labels, not in the sense to restrict messages, but maybe in a curatorial way to identify messages along certain themes or projects within the collection that might be meaningful to researchers. And then once that process is completed, we go in two separate paths, so moving on to preservation and access. So if the collection contains that high-risk data that I mentioned, which is almost 100%, it will. If you've ever worked with email, you know how much sensitive information people send. So in that case, the data needs to be handled in a specific way. Unfortunately, we're not able to ingest those processed collections into the Stanford Digital Repository, which is normally our last stop for preserving our born digital materials. We do export a version of the collection that is cleaned up of that high-risk data, and we preserve that in the SDR. Our hope is to re-engineer the SDR in the future so that we're able to ingest the entire collection. And then for the entire collection, we store it on our server that has been cleared to retain that high-risk data. So we retain multiple copies in different places. And then for access, Tricia mentioned the ePADD discovery module, which I think I probably have time to show really quickly after this. But that is our web-based module for displaying metadata about collections. So we do publish all metadata for processed collections there. We also update all of our relevant collection documentation about, including the collection record and the catalog and the finding aids with metadata about the collection, including, the number of messages, key terms, as well as information about any messages that have been restricted in a general way, the reason for those restrictions, and the duration of those restrictions, just to be completely transparent with researchers. And then for access, all of our collections are accessible in the full text, of course, omitting any messages that have been restricted due to containing personal or high-risk data. And those are available to researchers in our reading room. Okay. Well, maybe I'll just exit really quickly and show you the discovery module. So this is accessible from anywhere at ePADD.org. And you can see these are the collections that are available currently. Stanford's and UC Santa Cruz. Just putting this out there, if anybody has processed a collection with ePADD and would like to display their metadata here, please get in touch with us. We'd be happy to talk about that. But I'll just show you what this looks like. So this is available to anybody online. So a researcher could find this collection and read this information, which is very akin to like a finding aids front matter, giving them some background about the collection. If you look at the collection itself, you'll be able to see certain metadata about the collection, but what's interesting about it is that it's displayed within the context of the messages. So while it's very similar to the information you would see in a finding aid, it's displayed within context so that it gives you a much richer experience of what that information might mean within the collection, while still protecting the privacy of any individuals who may be discussed in the collection. So what you're looking at here is an example of a typical message within ePADD. This is one message. And you can see that information from the header has been redacted. So you can see the beginning of an email address, but everything after the @ symbol has been redacted to protect the privacy of correspondence. And then what you're seeing here with all these dots is that they represent the text of the message. The terms here are the entities that ePADD has extracted, and so you can see basically the key terms that are discussed in this message while not displaying the entire text of the message itself. And the thing that's important to note about this module is that it's not as if the full text of this message or the rest of the collection is sitting on a server and this is somehow masking it. When ePADD exports it from the processing module, it actually strips out all of the text, and so it's not on the back end anywhere where somebody could get at it. Okay, so let me go back to our slides. All right. So what's next for ePADD? So we are currently in phase 2 of development. As Tricia discussed, we're investigating integrating the file format conversion tool. And I just wanted to briefly mention, because I believe there's another session from the It Takes a Village folks here at the conference this week. So we just wanted to talk about our involvement in that project. We participated in their beta testing project last summer. It was a project geared towards making open source libraries projects more sustainable, and that's really a key focus that we've had for quite some time. And we hosted a session with the ePADD team as well as some members of our community who use the software to generate ideas about what we might do next, basically. And some of the ideas that floated to the surface included making some key modifications to ePADD's UI to improve accessibility of the software. Better support for non-English languages. ePADD is really geared towards English, and to expand the user community, we'd love to make some changes to both the UI and also how it works on the back end to be able to support that. We identified some features that we could incorporate that would provide more tools to do that sensitivity review, which is a big activity that is performed within ePADD. And then creating prepackaged tool sets to unify email projects, since that seems to be a major focus in the community. Okay, so now that concludes the presentation portion of our session, and we'd love to move on to the discussion. If everybody could, please navigate to the tiny URL on the screen there. Our plan is that we have 5 questions that we've brainstormed. We'll be voting and choosing the top 3. One second. We'll be choosing the top 3. So if everybody could get to the Jamboard and go ahead, let me show you what we were thinking. You can just designate your vote by adding a sticky or a text next to the question that you'd like to discuss, and please choose your top 3. I'll give you all a minute for that. Oh no, please +1 each of the questions that you would like to discuss, and then the questions with the most pluses.
Right, we'll just do +1 for each.
Yeah, I see some plus Bs and plus Cs. You can just put plus.
Yeah, you can just put +1. Thanks.
But we understand what it means.
Yeah, thank you.
We'll just do about a minute of voting here, and then we'll see what comes out on top.
Oh, cool. Yes? You can't all get in. Oh. Okay, I didn't know that was a thing. My apologies. Sorry to folks who couldn't get in.
I've exited.
Sure.
Once you vote, if you want to try exiting, so other folks can get in. Sorry, there's not like a way to police somebody. We got it. Let's knock it out.
Okay, how are we doing, Tricia? Okay. Okay, what do we think? I'm seeing question 3, question 2, and question 5. That's what I'm thinking. Okay, so folks who are in the Jamboard, if you are looking at the top right here, you can navigate between the cards for those questions. So starting with the first question, starting with question 3, what is your greatest challenge in email processing? We're going to give everybody 1 minute to just add their notes to the Jamboard, starting now. And this doesn't necessarily have to be ePADD related. We'd love to have a broader discussion about just email processing in general if that would be helpful to people.
So, Sally, this is frame 3 of 6. Once you've added a post-it note or a text on this, go ahead and exit out so that the other folks can get in if we're having trouble with critical mass. Sorry about that. And I'll start the timer. We're going to give everyone.
Oh, Tricia was just saying if you have finished adding your note or your comment, you can go ahead and just exit out of that particular board so that more people can get in.
Yeah, we'll keep that up here.
It says 50.
Thank you. Oh.
According to their documentation.
Oh,
I've never had that come up in classes.
I haven't either. I guess it's a good thing.
Okay, people feel free to continue adding, but I'd love to discuss what's there right now.
Yeah, we've got another 10 seconds to continue adding. All right.
Okay.
So I'm seeing some things about policy and is it a record, no policy agreement, lack of institutional support. That maybe. Oh, thanks, Sally.
I'm just grouping things that I see that have kind of a similar theme.
Buy-in, some appraisal things, knowing what the future process looks like.
I'd love to talk about this theme that I'm seeing about yes, +1. This idea, just this general challenge of working within our institutions to build support and understanding for processing and preserving email as an activity. And if anybody has a comment or something to share on that, please feel free to speak up too.
And we have a.
Tricia can run the microphone.
If anyone wants to elaborate on the post-it. Oh, sure. Thank you, Carol.
Thank you.
Otherwise, I'll just start talking. You definitely don't want that.
So we had, is this recorded, this session?
I think it's streaming online.
Okay, I won't go into specifics then. I think our organisation and our staff who are producing and using these emails, because we collect from our organisation, they don't see it as records, they don't see it as part of the narrative, as part of that documentation about anything, despite the fact that sometimes decisions are made over email. And particularly over COVID and high-level decisions and discussions that had to happen over email because no one was in the office, about changes to services and how we were going to support our communities and things. And we have lost a lot of that because we have lost high-level people in the past year or so who just deleted their inbox because they didn't see it as part of something bigger or important. So I think we have issues around people viewing the value in their email as well as other records.
Which is understandable because, as you told us, we've only had email for 51 years.
Thank you for doing the math on that. Has anybody had success in the room? Has anybody been in a successful situation of advocating for that becoming a policy at their institutions, that they'd be able to share that experience? Because it looks like you're not alone, certainly. No.
Is this on? Okay. So I'm Kate Murray from the Library of Congress, and I don't know that I can share a success, but I can tell you what we're doing. So we have almost no capacity for processing email, which is amazing, and because we've done quite a bit of work on it, but for various reasons, we really struggled to get tools approved, and ePADD is not an approved tool at the Library of Congress because we do not have a way to test it for our security. And so as opposed to building a pathway to test it, they just say no. So hopefully we're going to change that. But so we've recently formed an ad hoc group within our Special Collections Division and beyond. And we have just completed a survey of our email collections that are coming in, hopefully to build the case that we're getting more and more in each week. So now, like our manuscript collections, 2 years ago they had maybe 3 email collections, and now it's weekly they're getting new collections in, and that is helping us build the capacity and build the awareness with our senior leadership that we need additional tools. So I don't know if that's helpful for anyone, but we really had to start at the ad hoc level and work our way up.
Betty, thank you for sharing that, Kate. I feel like it's both troubling and a comfort to hear, like, even an institution like the Library of Congress is in its nascency. Yeah, that's one of those, there's no magic bullet answers to those kind of things. I want to maybe this area.
It's interesting that most of the comments here are not of any kind of technical nature. It's really just around like creating buy-in and institutional policies and kind of building that momentum. But there are a few questions that are sort of a more technical focus. I think there are a few here where people have mentioned challenges in dealing with certain specific file formats or nested emails, messages within messages, different languages and alphabets, character sets. Are there any specific examples that folks want to talk about in terms of like those technical issues that you've run into with email? There's no shortage, that's for sure.
Hi, I'm Tobias Wilde. I'm working for a university and I'm teaching archival classes, and one of the questions that arises constantly, if I have an email or if I have emails with viruses in it, what do I do? Do I archive the virus? Do I don't? All the authenticity problems. If somebody got a lot of spam mails, if somebody worked on developing Viagra, how do I separate the spam mail with the real mail? These are all appraisal questions, and are there any practices in other organizations who really dealt with the large numbers of mail? That's my question.
One of your collections was.
Yeah. Well, that is really one of the key things that ePADD was designed to help with, because obviously there's so much noise within email collections. Like you were saying, all of the spam. One thing that it's able to do that can be very helpful is to identify correspondence as mailing lists. So if you've noticed that a particular correspondence is actually a mailing list and you would like to omit it from all of your searches, you can designate it as such. I don't know, in my personal experience, that it's still a fairly manual process to do that appraisal. You can automate it up to a point, but you need a human to make the final call. I heard a really interesting anecdote from someone who was processing email, and they said that one search term that they actually found to be really helpful was lunch, because people would email about, hey, do you want to meet me for lunch? And then they'd remember something later in the day, and they'd tack it onto that email. And that was actually a significant message. The lunch email was not important, but the one that came after was really important. So I think it's also about getting to know your particular collections and what is noise and what is the valuable information from a research standpoint that's in that collection. Okay, we've got 2 more minutes here. Is there anything else? Yeah.
It's actually back to the previous question. Looking at that last workflow process diagram, it looked like you had managed to get buy-in from colleagues to do appraisal and import. How did you get them to do that? What was your advocacy like?
Yeah.
How did you persuade them, and who generally tends to do that themselves? Like, which colleagues?
Sure, that's a great question. I wasn't in my role at that time, but I'll speak to what I know. I think it was kind of a case of being able to demonstrate what you can do with email. And so we had received a collection on a series of floppy disks, so we hadn't necessarily sought it out. We just received it with a collection, and we were able to use that as a case to demonstrate how valuable email is as a research, as a primary resource. And that was kind of the initial thing that got the ball rolling, that we were really able to advocate with curators that, you know, if you bring this in, we will do something with it, and we will be able to provide access to it, and it can be a really fantastic resource for researchers.
I feel like, is it a good time to maybe mention for the first time the email archiving? Sally has been running an email archiving interest group for a while, and right now we're focused on accessioning, email accessioning, but I feel like something that would be really useful is for institutions that are trying to get this up and running is to be able to see email policy documents from other organizations, and it'd be great, you know, that could be like a future project for our group, is to, like, if we had some kind of platform where people could share, if they felt comfortable sharing just like their outright things or redacted versions of their policy, that other organizations could then take back to their places and say, like, look at everything, this is how they've worded it, this is how they've justified it. I think it'd be nice to be able to amass kind of a community corpus of that kind of, those resources.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, I know we could keep going, but I'd love to move on to our next question, which I believe was question, I think it was question 4.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, what kinds of ePADD resources in the forms of guides, events, workshops, tutorials, interest groups would be the most helpful to you, whether you've been using ePADD or you're just interested in learning more and getting started? Again, I'll put 1 minute on the clock. Please go ahead and add your notes.
This is frame 5 out of 7, and same goes as before. As Kyle looked at the documentation for us, apparently it's a 50-person limit, and we've never hit that before, so I'm grateful that we're all here participating today. So once you've added your two cents in there, hop out and let someone else add theirs, please.
Okay, I'll give about 15 more seconds. Let's see what we've got so far.
This one's going to be really helpful for us as we're wrapping up our ePADD Plus project and trying to put out, you know, what do we do? Documentations, guides, videos? Best.
Yes.
Share policy documents. Maybe we could like externalize our workflows.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, I'm seeing some confluence around the idea of sharing institutional workflows and institutional use cases, which I love that idea too. I don't know that there are too many out there right now, so that would be very helpful. Oh,
Thank you for sorting these.
yeah, and then I'm also seeing a few folks mentioning step-by-step guides, recorded demonstrations. Yeah, we'd love to take advantage of Paul Carlyle's wonderful voiceover voice to do more of those. Does anyone want to add to this discussion, expand on something that they added, or react to something that they see here? Yeah, we have someone up there. You grab the microphone.
In terms of the things like the recorded demos and the step-by-step guides, we've just recently procured Preservica, and they've got a really good breakdown of like when you need to do your metadata. Here's the training video and a step-by-step guide, and us using the system and recording that. So you could do a different one for each module, a different one for each workflow, and it means that people can dip into the bit they need to know now and wait and use the ones for the bits they need to know later once they get to that stage. Or they can watch all of them together. Preservica also offer those as in-person sessions once a month or once every 6 weeks. So you can watch the recorded one, or you can go to the in-person, or both. And I think that's been really helpful for us, and the different ways that people learn as well.
Mm-hmm.
So just a suggestion.
No, that's great. I appreciate that. And I think a lot of these too are not necessarily ePADD specific, which I welcome. But I think it just goes to show that there's such a need for information just generally in this space of working with email. From the complete life cycle, I see somebody who added guides and models for discussing email archiving with donors, which is so important, and that's right at the beginning of the process.
Workflows that cover like common and maybe uncommon scenarios, like maybe like pulling out use cases. That's a really interesting idea. I could see as incorporating or something.
I think something which a lot of us who are in like institutions with limited IT capability would like is like a sandbox mode. So like just an online sandbox mode where we can like play with it and then show it to some of our IT professionals and say, look, this is a safe tool to use.
Sure. Like
that might be something really useful.
Yeah, something so that you wouldn't have to like download it yourself.
Yeah, it'd be like a sort
similar
of
to like Kate's issue at the
yeah,
other
like sort of
Congress.
like just like a tutorial sandbox area where you're able to sort of look at it and sort of play with the various different formats and see how it would work with access and that.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. I really appreciate that. Okay. Okay, I think in the interest of time, we may move on to our last question, but I really appreciate all of these suggestions, and we will definitely save these for future reference. Oh, for sure. Like within a year, definitely. Our last question, what would make ePADD more useful in your work? And that is going to be on slide 6. Please be brutally honest. We won't hurt our feelings at all.
Will help. I'll add, if you're not careful with this one, we might find out who you are and make you run the next phase of development on it. Good to get this expanded on. Just one so far. I guess it's fully useful. No other work needs to be done. All right, planned work. I like to see that. Cool. Embedding a version tool. I will add, while people are posting some other stuff in here, hopefully, the embedding a conversion tool, I mentioned, I mentioned that just Friday we talked to the guy that created and has been running Email Commie since the late 90s. It's by a company called Weird Kid Software, so we talked to the Weird Kid himself. And he was really excited. Like he said that he had initially created that software, this application, for a whole different segment of users. So it was really interesting. He was very open to the idea of partnering with the library and archives community and creating API functionality that would specifically work for our community. We were trying to talk to him about maybe like enterprise level licensing for institutions that need a lot of different licenses for it. But it was a really good conversation. We're excited about next steps for that, and excited about seeing about optionally integrating Email Commie into ePADD for that import and export of additional formats other than inbox. So. Oh, so we did talk about it. Stephen was on the, Stephen Abrams, the PI on the project, was on the call, and he gently suggested it. I think he's the only person in the company right now. I think during the pandemic, it just got scaled down, and he's got a kid in college, so I don't think he's going to be open sourcing it right now. But he did say 10 to 15 years when he's retiring. A couple of his corporate contracts, they have first right of refusal to buy the code. It doesn't mean that he has to sell it to them. He's like, I would really like to open source it, but that is at least a decade in the future, so not anytime soon, unfortunately. At least that's what we were told. But he's more excited about working with us than he is, like criminal digital forensics and stuff like that.
I would just say, one of the things about that as people start to adopt common tools like that is that we have absolutely no idea how it works.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So you can essentially just have massive numbers of records that get converted based on this tool, and all we know is it did what the tool does.
Yeah.
Actually know if it's accurate. So.
It would be, yeah. And you know what, he was really, because he started it as a tool where people were needing it for, for like criminal law and stuff, or for like evidentiary value, he has been really very finicky about making sure that everything's coming out accurately on the other side. But I will say, if somebody wanted to put the effort into creating an open source tool for the community, I feel like it is and isn't a need. Like, obviously, every community-supported project, it takes a lot of effort to keep these things running, so it's an ongoing effort. And sometimes the commercial tools are just like, oh, they're cheap enough to go ahead and use. But as Cal points out, like, there's a lot that you don't end up knowing about it under the covers then. So, I don't know. Go ahead. You were facilitating as well.
No. Ability to work with emails saved as PDF. I know that there's a lot of work going on right now regarding emails as PDFs. Is it the email as PDF?
Yeah, I think it's
project?
like email to PDF project.
Email to PDF, yeah. So please be on the lookout for their work.
So I can give an update on that?
Please, yeah, thanks.
So there's a working group who's working with the PDF Association and PDF developers to create a profile of PDF specifically for email. So, and I know people have thoughts and feelings about PDF in general, but PDF is often a common export format in most email clients and browsers. So, it is. If we were able to specify to the PDF community and PDF developers what we want to see in a PDF that would specifically contain email, so that work is ongoing right now. But if anyone wants more information about that, you can feel free to contact me, and I can provide that.
Thank you, Kate. I know a lot of people are doing it that way, so I'm really glad that there's work being done to work with them to specify what that would look like. Would anyone want to, I'm interested in some elaboration on this note here about ability to switch the view to regular email inbox view. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Yep, right down here in the middle.
Thank you. Hi, yeah, that was me who put that on there. And this actually comes from our public services team. I think researchers are often a bit frustrated or like confused that they expect to see somebody's email inbox, but instead what they see is the ePADD interface. And I think that it would be, I think that there are a lot of assumptions built into the process of developing the delivery module in terms of what researchers want to see. And I think that those, in my experience, those assumptions are not always in line with what the researcher's actual experience is. I'm sure a lot of thought went into making those choices. I don't mean to imply that they were thoughtless ones. But I do think that there would be a lot of benefit in doing a little bit of requirements gathering with respect to some of the researchers who use email archives, because that's a really frequent, I don't want to say complaint, but like question that we receive a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know it's a very different view from how people are used to interacting with email.
Right.
So that can be, there's a bit of a learning curve to understanding, okay, what do I do now?
Yeah, and I do think that
tool.
depending on the kind of research being done or like the researcher's aims, it's arguably more helpful to have the current interface. But I think that having the ability to view either would be really impactful.
For sure, yeah. I love that suggestion.
And I feel like this isn't like helpful in terms of like what ePADD might be able to do, but I feel like that is a really good point in terms of thinking to, are you going to use PDF? Are you going to use something like process with ePADD and move into the ePADD discovery and delivery? Or are you going to retain those original emails and maybe there's some really great emulation work going on in the community with like Yale's emulation as a service infrastructure. So to emulate somebody's like inbox and keep those original PSTs, I feel like that could be, it's not seamless then. It's not like you can just switch, I'm using ePADD and here's but I feel like there are capabilities out there. They're just not necessarily consolidated into a single tool.
Yeah.
So I hear what you're saying about that. But I think it would be really cool to see some people come up with some emulation use cases or just like good kind of examples.
And to do some user testing or some research on how users would like to use email archives, which I don't think has really been done. Being that there aren't so many examples of processed email collections out there, it's just not something that has happened yet, but I think it would be so valuable to a lot of work going forward. Yeah, thank you. Any last thoughts on this before we wrap up?
And thank you for these suggestions.
Yeah, thank you very, very much.
So, in our last 5 minutes, Stanford doesn't want to have to run everything. They've done everything so beautifully, and Manchester and Harvard have been really excited to get involved, but we want more partners. Partner with us. Let's help us make ePADD even better. There's an ePADD listserv on the, I didn't include it here, that was silly, but you can subscribe to it off of Stanford's ePADD page. Just type in Stanford ePADD, you'll get there. But I don't know if there's ePADD on Twitter. There's the ePADD GitHub where you can become a code contributor as well. We have stickers. You could just help now by putting a sticker on your computer, or just putting it on your face or something, walking around. But just signal I'm in the ePADD community and I'm interested, and you want to talk about it and start contributing, do that. But I think the email archiving interest group is...
Yeah, we host an email archiving interest group, which is not specific to ePADD at all. It's really just trying to gather the community of people who are working with email, because it can be a very difficult experience if you're trying to do it on your own. We host this once a month. We're actually meeting on Wednesday. I did not postpone it, which might have been a bad idea, but yeah, please join us. We're working on drafting some documentation on best practice for acquiring email. So if you have thoughts on that or need to learn about that, we'd love to have you. And then finally, please check out our GitHub. That's where you can download the software, and if you so choose to contribute to the code. And yeah, thank you very, very much for having us. Thank you for the organizers for making this event possible. It's so fantastic to be here. We really appreciate you being here. Thank you.